The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on do not sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord.
It's hard to just jump into this one, I have to say. I got to lower your expectations before I try to give this homily. But I like to read the gospel to get a bit revved up. But it's hard to jump into this one. It's such a tricky scene that we see unfold in front of us. There's so much here, and I think it's certainly worth our time to read the gospel account very slowly, very carefully. Because there's a lot going on. But I want to point out just a few of the things that kind of catch my eye that help us, I think, set the stage for a good Passion Tide. Right? We're in the last, as of right now, we're in the last 2 weeks of Lent. So it's right that these weeks focus us in on what Jesus is going to accomplish, his exodus, as we heard in the Transfiguration account. Jesus is going to his death. And it's ours to make sure that Jesus going to his death is the focus of our hearts and minds these next 2 weeks. And I think that the passage helps us with that. I think it does more than that, but it helps us with that. And like I said, I just want to point out really a couple things. One is this. How are we to understand this account? There are a couple hints, like how we're to understand the account. One is that this happens in the temple, right? So Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. This is the beginning. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning, he arrived again in the temple area. All the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. There's a lot here. Because John is telling us the story of how God became king in and as Jesus of Nazareth. So this is part of the messianic story, the story of the Messiah, the story of God's anointed king. He is one who has authority over the temple. Yeah, even the workings of the temple. The rightful king has that authority. So having Jesus in the temple area and teaching is very significant. And in I don't know if I'd say this is the heart of John's gospel. We're perhaps getting into that. But the central question is in this part of the gospel is about Jesus being the Messiah. Who is Jesus? And is he God's anointed king? So this is like the bit of the setup. Now, when the scribes and Pharisees bring this woman, okay, what do we see about them? A commentary later on, when they ask him what to do, Jesus what to do, we hear the comment, they said this to test him so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Now, I think that we don't want to be, in this case then, distracted by even a lot of the action of the gospel. And I'll say distraction, I think the woman we have to address, but secondarily so, because here, we're not going to do rather what the scribes and Pharisees were doing. We're not going to use the woman to prove our point, but this is what happens. They did this, and what is the this? They said this. What did they say? They asked, now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women, so what do you say? But the whole thing, bringing her there, all the way through to asking him this question, they are using this woman to trap Jesus. And we may want to think of how despicable an act that is. To use someone in that manner to try to trap someone else, to try to trap Jesus. We don't know. This is why, and you can see I'm getting agitated. But and I have to tell you because some of you don't see that I'm getting agitated. But I'm trying to communicate it effectively. The challenge is that we've heard the story so often that it's like, oh yeah, this is the one where Jesus does this. We don't see how insidious this kind of stuff is. But John wants us to. There's a lot here. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that I'd love to talk about, but don't have time. We have to trust, St. John the Evangelist, his selection of this passage, retell it in this particular order, and the rest. But these passages about Jesus' messiahship and the like is also accompanied by Jesus' growing opposition to Jesus from the scribes and Pharisees. And we're meant to see that these are not people of goodwill. And if we can't see it, we need to be able to see it. We need to see it on the page when we read it. It's very important. I say it's not people that they're people of goodwill. They're people who have another agenda, and they think that Jesus is undermining their agenda. That's something that we might want to return to. Okay, so Rita, if I don't return to it at the end, maybe you can bring it up again and we'll revisit it. But this is a big deal. How does Jesus treat these people when they bring this woman? I think somewhat dismissively. Yeah. I know that he's doing it for their best. He loves them, scribes and the Pharisees, and the woman. What does he do? He bends down, he writes on the ground. And people have said all kinds of things about this, that he might be writing on the ground like a list of sins other than adultery, maybe sins that they've committed. Maybe they're their sins. He's writing on the ground. Right? So he's giving them some sense of, hey, look, I know what's going on here. We're not pursuing the purity project. You're pursuing your own agenda. You're using her to do it, and you guys are just as guilty as she is. I'm not sure. I think you can take that line. I like the idea that Jesus is just doodling on the ground. He's just doodling because he's giving them an opportunity to rethink what they're doing. Give them space. Maybe they'll come to their senses. It's not really a good strategy. Probably we see that it's not, but he's given them opportunity to figure it out. But he's not gonna dignify that with a response, right? We've heard that line before. I'm not going to dignify that with a response. This is what Jesus, I think, is doing. Just doing. But when he's pushed, he's going to act. But how does he act? He acts by putting himself in. Now, whether he does this physically or not, in my blast email, I tried to find the image that inferred that Jesus was doing this physically, but whether or not it happened physically is a different question. He puts himself between them and her. That's what he does. Yeah? So the woman caught in adultery. It's not that easy to catch someone in adultery. Can I say? These creeps were on the lookout, were they not? There's a lot going on here. This woman caught in adultery. Can I say this as well? Deserving, according to the law of Moses, deserving to be killed. Yeah, the legislation is such that she deserves to be killed. That's very important, right? Because adultery will destroy a society. God has prescript against it because it will destroy a society. If you can't trust your spouse, we're in a lot of trouble. And God wants to come to the support of that very thing. So there's a reason why this is, one of the serious ones that demands the punishment of death in the law. But what is the law about? Is the law to be weaponized to attack someone else? And it gets this extreme to try to undermine and overturn Jesus' agenda, the agenda of the world's true king, God's anointed king? Or is the law intended to serve as something of a mirror for everyone, such that it doesn't become an opportunity to point at the person who's breaking the law, but an opportunity to reflect on my own wickedness? And I can say this because this is what Jesus does in the passage. He takes what they bring, the woman with the accusation, and he says, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Because in the end, this is the law. This is the law and the prophets. Yeah, it's like a primal expression of what's perfectly consistent, Old Testament to New, God's love. So even like the punishments associated with, this is an expression of God's love. But here, it's not to be weaponized in this way. And Jesus is clear then, because what did they do? They turned the woman into a means to an end. A means to their own end. I mean, that's pretty much akin to, I don't know if it's on the level of like adultery, like that kind of thing. It's more like prostitution and things, things of that sort, but it's, using someone for some other end. No, she is an end in herself. And Jesus then is going to stand between them, and he's going to put himself in the firing line. And it's not the last time he does it. Right, we can't see the cross, otherwise I'll point there, but he's putting himself in the way so that we, although justly condemned by our own acts and actions and the rest, that we can find the mercy of God. So the thing is, Jesus, I suppose perhaps there's always the last part. You need a bit of commentary on it as well. He says, has anyone condemned you? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore. Yeah, so Jesus has not said that this sin doesn't matter. Quite the contrary. He's determined to overcome it. He's determined to overcome the transgression against the other and against God and the rest. He's going to bring God's mercy to life. That's, undeserved love. He's going to go all the way. He's determined to do it no matter the cost. And Jesus has taken on the cost of her sin. He's literally stood in the way, right? He has put himself in between the anger of the mob and the woman who was guilty, but whom he chose to save, to rescue. There's a lot here for us. I don't want to make all the connections, but I do want to say that we ought to see ourselves in this story, probably in every aspect of it. And we can rest in the fact that Jesus is determined to rescue us as well. He wants to rescue the scribes and the Pharisees. So if you find yourself in a place where, you are full of yourself, I don't know, that you are self-righteous, that you believe that you deserve God's love because you've earned it, you've lived such a great life, you've been so good your whole life, right? This is older brother stuff from the parable of the prodigal son. If you're in that space, don't worry, God can rescue you too. If you're humble enough to realize that you need it. So please do that. Don't believe that you don't need rescuing. You do need rescuing. Every day and many times a day. And beyond, like our whole being, we need to be rescued. Why? Because we're not Jesus yet. And that's who we have to be. We have to become nothing other than an expression of God's love. We have to become an expression of God's mercy. In your shape, in the shape of Chuck and MJ and, in the shape of Rita and Ron and Martha and all the rest. But we need to become an expression of God's love, of His mercy. We can't be deterred by anything. We don't want to be deterred by our self-righteousness, our own self-righteousness. We don't want to be deterred by our sinfulness. We don't want to be deterred by anything that we're facing. In Jesus' case, we don't want to be deterred by, here, unjust accusation. We don't want to be deterred by, the cost of having to love someone else. We just want to do it. And we know that we might have to do it also all the way to death. Well, good. That'll be our glory. That and that alone will be our glory. To have loved and to have loved well. To have loved resolutely, even and especially in cases where it hurts, where it costs, where it has a cost. That's our glory, and that's the glory that we expect here, that we anticipate here and now, as we make this next 2-week pilgrimage towards Easter. If we love well, then we know Easter joy. We know Easter glory. But that's the way Jesus is heading. That's the way I want to head as well, and I hope that's the way that we can all go together.